Robby, what's on your radar?
Well, Hunter Biden, the troubled son of President Joe Biden, convicted last week of 3 charges relating to illegally purchasing a gun while suffering from drug addiction. Now, it's fair to ask whether prosecutors should have brought these charges at all. My colleague at Reason Magazine, Jacob Sullum, described the violated law in question as, quote, widely flouted, haphazardly enforced, and constitutionally dubious. Republican Representative Thomas Massie of Kentucky wrote on X, Hunter might deserve to be in jail for something, but purchasing a gun is not it. There are millions of marijuana users who own guns in this country, and none of them should be in jail for purchasing or possessing a firearm against current laws. Now, one interesting feature of the trial was the delivery mechanism for the evidence used by the state to prove that Hunter Biden was indeed addicted to drugs at the time he purchased the gun. That evidence came from photos and messages that were obtained from Hunter's laptop, which he abandoned at a Delaware repair store in April of 2019. The contents of this laptop, readers may recall, fell into the hands of government investigators, Republican operatives, and eventually the media. On October 14, 2020, just weeks before the election, the New York Post published a story about the laptop's contents, arguing that it demonstrated corruption and influence peddling involving the Biden family. The rest is history. Mainstream media figures smeared the laptop story as misinformation. National intelligence experts described it as part of a potential Russian influence campaign, and social media sites suppressed it. Joe Biden himself dismissed it as fake during a debate with then-President Donald Trump. He cited the assessments of the intelligence community to make that claim. Now, it is notable that years later, the accuracy of the information on the laptop is no longer in doubt. It is not being questioned. Claims of Russian malfeasance are utterly unfounded. One can disagree with the New York Post conclusions about the relevance of the information, but it's abundantly clear that it was Hunter Biden's laptop, and it was discarded at a repair shop. Russia had nothing to do with it. Now, many conservatives are rightly taking a victory lap. Sean Hannity delivered a thunderous monologue this week, saying, in other words, you were lied to on a very high level just before an election by numerous people and entire institutions. You were lied to by Hunter Biden himself. You were lied to by his father, your president, Joe Biden. You were lied to by NBC News, fake news, CNN, NPR. Let's just say pretty much everybody in the media mob. Let's listen.
The critical development from this trial is one huge single piece of evidence entered into the official record by your U.S. government, and that's Hunter Biden's very real laptop. Not only did the U.S. federal government confirm that Hunter's laptop is real, they confirmed that its contents are real, and the contents have not been tampered with by anybody. In other words, you were lied to on a very high level just before an election by numerous people and entire institutions. You were lied to by Hunter Biden himself. You were lied to by his father, your President Joe Biden. You were lied to by NBC News, fake news, CNN, NPR. Well, let's just say pretty much everybody in the media mob. The list is far too long to mention.
Now, look, one can quibble with the term lie, but it's inarguable that the aforementioned institutions and individuals did, in fact, get the laptop story totally, egregiously wrong. Now enter the Washington Post's Philip Bump, who somehow thinks the media's conduct is worth defending, and conservative critics have gone astray. In a recent column, he stubbornly insists that concerns about the laptop were valid and chides Hannity, etc., for taking a victory lap. He writes, the issue at the time of the New York Post report was in part that the material might not be authentic. In part, though, it was that it was authentic and being released in October 2020 as part of a foreign effort to influence the outcome of the presidential race. Okay, it's unclear why he thinks this helps his case, since both of those points, that the information might be inauthentic or may be authentic but Russian-derived, both of those points are wrong. The information is authentic, and no evidence has ever surfaced that Russia had something to do with it. Bump subsequently wastes a great deal of ink explaining why he believes those concerns about Russian intervention were well-founded. Again, this is beside the point. We now know and have definitively proven that they were not well-founded. Twitter and Facebook, which at the time faced incredible pressure to act, suppressed the story on a fraudulent basis. Now, he's right that the intelligence officials who proclaimed the laptop had all the classic earmarks of a Russian misinformation operation were cautious in their assessment, more cautious than the media acknowledged. Indeed, the principal bad actor here is Politico, that ran with the inaccurate headline, "Hunter Biden's story is Russian disinfo, dozens of former intelligence officials say." They didn't quite say that. Nowhere in his column does Bump chide Politico for exaggerating the facts. On the contrary, he is making excuses for exactly this kind of thing. Now, all has not been well at the Washington Post lately. Management fired top editor Sally Busby earlier this month, with chief executive Will Lewis admitting candidly that the paper had lost $77 million in 2023 amidst a staggering 50% audience decline. In a recent staff meeting, Lewis angered some by bluntly stating, quote, "People are not reading your stuff. I can't sugarcoat it anymore." If the problem is that the paper has lost its readers' trust, editors might think carefully about why that is the case. When it comes to the Hunter Biden laptop story, the textbook situation of the liberal media and mainstream institutions getting something wrong, and conservative complaints about bias and unfairness in coverage being absolutely correct, the Washington Post still refuses to just take the L. Incredible.
Look, I think it's interesting that Sean Hannity wants to lean into the line, given Fox having to pay out the huge Dominion settlement. Okay. What I will say is I think media needs to be very careful as we head into this election, because there is going to be a lot of disinformation. There is a lot of mistrust among voters. And as we saw with the New York Post over the last couple of days, videos are getting released that are being edited, being manipulated to fit a certain story. And I think that's where we've really got to be careful, because once voters lose faith in the media completely, it's over. We already live in silos. We already live in worlds where everything's kind of a confirmation bias.
But is the media worthy of our trust, is the question many Americans are asking. And conservative Americans will point to this story. This is the definitive story for why the whole media is aligned against them. And I don't think every conservative criticism of the media, or especially of social media, because the social media companies are the ones who suppress this story, but it's really not. I mean, you can still criticize them, but they were. The FBI came to them and said, "You should suppress something exactly like this," and they were wrong. Yeah. When the companies, and I think they would do it differently now. They've learned not to trust these so-called misinformation experts who are entirely one-sided. Yeah. And that's that. You're right that there's manipulated videos. Some of that footage of Biden was inauthentic. Absolutely correct. I think we're going to talk about that a little bit later in the show. But you just can't. You also can't automatically trust the people doing that kind of checking because they get it wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at the context of what happened, you had Rudy Giuliani showing up and saying that there was this laptop that had just appeared out of nowhere at this random computer store a couple of weeks before an election with incriminating evidence. It all sounded too good to be true.
Did it?
It did. I mean,
But the Russian part of it sounded like a James Bond story to me. Because I'm like, well, where does Russia come? Like, okay, are you saying is the laptop, because very quickly it was clear that there was an actual laptop repair store owner. And I'm like, well, is he an actor? Is he a like,
And there were a lot of questions.
Boris and Natasha, give me laptop. I'm like, what is this is starting to get pretty out there.
I think had that story happen farther away from the election, I think there would have been more of an ability to really go in and see what was true and what wasn't. There was a panic by the media, how to handle that story, given how important it was. And let's not forget, in 2016, the Russia narrative that came out. I think the media was really cautious in trying to ensure that they weren't duped. And
you say cautious, I say alarmist. I mean, if they'd left it alone, it would have been less of a story.
Do you really think that? I mean, it was
100%. It became the story became that they're trying to prevent you. The Democratic Party, their allies in the mainstream media, the intelligence community is trying to prevent you from consuming this story. And that made people pay more. I think it's a textbook example of the Streisand effect. We're trying to suppress something, basically, because they suppressed that story, but then there were 8,000 stories about the suppression of the story that made it, I think, a bigger deal.
I think it's a good example of good intentions going poorly. Trying to be responsible in how you handle stories like this right before an election, and instead of doing the right thing, you end up going too far and being too cautious and getting the story wrong.
Well, we'll see what happens this time round. More Rising right after this.